Hello friends, today some quick thoughts on something you definitely probably haven't heard of, unless you're like a huge metalhead and into international acts, but we're going to talk about Ektomorf's Fury today. Ektomorf, the best way to explain them is they're basically the Hungarian version of Soulfly. I mean, that's literally what they sound like, so there's no better way to explain it than that. If you heard Soulfly, then you've basically heard Ektomorf. The difference is that he's Hungarian, he has a bit of an accent, and admittedly his lyrics are a little bit worse, but there you go. I've been a fan of Ektomorf for quite a while, actually, and what basically got me into them was back in high school. I listened to their 2006 album Outcast, basically on loop all the time. It's easily their best album, and they haven't really made anything as good as Outcast since. And that's just because every single song on there is consistently just catchy and captivating and interesting. Every single groove is definitely repetitive, but they're all different and unique in a lot of different ways. And I think because of that, it just relentlessly attacks you throughout the entire album. The lyrics are addictive, so they're not too complicated. And Zoli Farkas definitely does not write good lyrics most of the time. But the lyrics here are good enough that they're tolerable and you don't cringe basically, but they're simple enough that you can actually growl along yourself if you can. So that it definitely is my favorite of their albums. I think the other thing that really makes Outkast stand out compared to a lot of their other albums is that he really goes all in on the gypsy influence, because Zoli has a gypsy background in Hungary. And so there are a few albums where he really pulls that in, and I think the best run of Ektomorf albums is easily 2004 to 2006. So you got Destroy, Instinct, and Outcast, all of which, especially Destroy and Outcast, and I would say Outcast the most, pull from those sort of gypsy influences to make it actually craft some sort of original sounding something for Ektomorf. I think when Ektomorf is at their worst, you confuse them for Soulfly. And that happened a lot in the album that came out 3 years after Outcast, that being What Doesn't Kill Me, because all of them sound like, like you could basically interchange a Soulfly album with that and you wouldn't be confused, because there isn't a point where he really draws influence from anything else other than just Soulfly. Which is fine. I mean, there's a lot of rip-offs of a lot of bands, but I think that when Ektomorf's at their best, they're more than just a rip-off of an American groove metal band. I think that they're better than that. So I think their best run of albums is easily Destroy, Instinct, Outcast, and they've basically been trying to replicate that ever since. And they've tried a few times, and they've done some really interesting things in that time frame. So after the letdown of What Doesn't Kill Me, then you have Redemption, which came out in 2010, and this actually probably came out as I started listening to Ektomorf, maybe a little bit before, so it was easily their most recent album, and that was probably why I started listening to it. The thing that makes this one interesting is it draws a lot more nu metal influence than probably any of their prior records. So you have songs like The One, which maybe your hardcore metalers might hate because of the hook or the chorus on that thing, because it's kind of cheesy, but I think it creates a sort of different sound for that album that really makes it stand out, and I think it sort of fuses a lot of different sounds and influences in a unique way that you don't really see anywhere else outside of this album and maybe a few other places. So that's definitely a unique album. My favorite Ektomorf album that isn't like a main album is The Acoustic, which came out in 2012, and it's a bunch of covers of their old songs, and probably, a greatest hits album, really, when it comes down to it. But instead of being a conventional greatest hits album, they're all covers done on acoustic guitar, and not just a acoustic guitar, we're talking like 3 acoustic guitars and then a drum set. And it creates a really, really unique acoustic sound that I haven't really seen replicated in many other places on a full-scale album-length project like this, quite in this way. Because a lot of times when a band makes an acoustic album or you have an acoustic act, then they focus on it being exclusively acoustic guitar. So you might have, 1 to 3, or sometimes even 1 to 3 acoustic guitars, or maybe sometimes you have some other like stringed instruments like violin or something like that if you really want to go all in on that sort of direction. But the sound that it creates there has this really sort of raw, gritty, you know, I'm like almost garage like sound to it. It really feels like you got a group of like gypsies with their freaking gypsy van over there. They're gathering around a fire and they're just jamming on acoustic guitar. That's what that sounds like to me. And it's a really unique sound, and I really like everything they do there. Also, all the covers that they do on here are fantastic. And then, of course, they released another album that year, Black Flag, which is one of the mainline albums. And then they have a cover of The Pretender by Foo Fighters, and that sounds like garbage. So, hey, sometimes it doesn't work. The album itself is okay, but I think they stepped up their game again in Retribution. Came out in 2014, and I think what they do here is they kind of speed things up a little bit. I wouldn't say that they draw on thrash influences, but they speed things up a bit more. They have more complicated riffs and grooves here, but the lyrics are as bad as they always are. But then 3 years ago, we got Aggressor, and this is where we're actually going to get into the me talking about this new album that came out. And Aggressor was kind of a huge, like, I was torn on it because there's some solid tracks on here, but and sometimes some of these songs just on this album, this 2015 album, just sound so different for Ektomorf that I just didn't expect it. But then there are some other songs on here that really grooved hard, and I was a huge fan of. And it seemed like they were drawing more influences for some more technical groove metal. That's not really a term, but stuff kind of more along the lines of like Lamb of God, or I don't know. That's the best example I can think of. I mean, maybe Fear Factory, but not really. Later Fear Factory. I don't freaking know. Anyway, so some of these songs were really good, but some of them are just kind of a mess, and I think it was because they were really trying to experiment and bring something new to the table. Because I think with Retribution, while it was faster, I think it was sort of derivative, and so I think they wanted it. Zoli, this is basically Zoli's dream project, so I'm gonna stop saying they and pretend it's anything other than Zoli's project. But he tried to do something new here, and I think it kind of worked, but it's just sort of a mixed bag for me. I never really went back to it. And the other problem with this album is it was super long, Aggressor, and that's something that Fury fixes. So I think the first thing I want to say and commend Zoli on for this album is that it's short. It's a nice 30 minutes. And with a groove metal album, the songs get fairly repetitive, and it can be a drag when you're trying to listen to a whole thing like that, especially if you don't change up the sound. And they only really changed up the sound once throughout the entire record, so it's pretty derivative as you go through. So keeping it short and punchy is really nice. A lot of times when Ektomorf has had longer records, what they've done is they've broken it up with different kinds of songs or sounds throughout, and they don't really do that here. They just kind of constantly hit you, and that's fine as long as it's short and punchy, which this is. It's tight. There's no wasted time here, which I really appreciate. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is that first song is killer. It's called The Prophet of Doom, and I would say this is kind of where, when I said they sped up in Retribution, I mean, this is almost getting thrashy. Which really surprised me. And I was hoping that the rest of the album would kind of go that direction because of how good that first song was. But it just doesn't. And pretty much by the time you get to like Fury and Bullet in Your Head, the third and fourth track, it basically just goes back to this sort of derivative groove metal that you expect from Ektomorf. I would say that the production is much more clean on this album, but it's also more dense. So a lot of times in their earlier stuff, it sounded dirty. Like the production sounded dirty. It sounded like they were recording it in like what's the best way to put it? They weren't recording it in a studio. They were recording in just some random alleyway somewhere. I guess the best way to put it. It didn't sound super clean here, where it seems like they're picking up every single detail out of these things. They're using really high quality equipment. They're going all out on that sort of sense. They want it to sound super clean, and they want you to hear everything that's going on. Probably not the best way to explain what I'm trying to say, but whatever. That's a thing. But yeah, as you get into the latter half of the album, it just sort of gets derivative and repetitive, and what really saves it is the fact that these songs are short, and also that the lyrics, while are better than normal, they're definitely above average. There's also sort of like a running theme of like war throughout this album. A lot of the subject matter kind of is centralized in the album, which isn't something you normally see. A lot of times, Zoli just writes lyrics about hating people, wanting to kill his enemies. Oh, I hate you, and you suck, and I'm a gypsy. That's like all he talks about. But here he actually kind of has some more, there's more substance to this album, which makes it, more re-listenable than some of the other more recent projects, I think. So I don't know. I really like this, but it definitely has its problems. I would say probably their best album since Retribution. It's probably better than Retribution, but it's definitely their best album since Redemption in 2010. Because Retribution was, I think this is less derivative than Retribution to some degree. I think the real standout here is that there's more technicality to what's going on there. There's actual guitar solos sometimes, and not saying that there weren't guitar solos before, but like they're actual guitar solos. It's not just like, oh, I'm going up a scale. Oh, I'm going down a scale. Ooh, look at me, I'm doing I'm wiggling the string, it's making some weird distortion, and that's the solo. Like here, they're actually showing their technical ability, which is pretty nice. It also is kind of sad to some degree because a lot of the band left. In fact, everyone except Zoli left in late 2017. So this is kind of like the instrumentalist's swan song, and they weren't credited in the album because they left the band before the album came out. So I'm guessing that they're not. I don't know how payment works for that, but the only person credited in this whole album is Zoli. I was expecting, because a lot of the articles were like, oh, well, is the new band going to record? Is the old band going to record it? I don't know. They left in freaking December. Do you think they're going to record and release the thing in less than 2 months? I don't think so. So it's definitely the old group of instrumentalists recording, and they definitely shine here. And it'll be interesting to see what Ektomorf does next, because it's going to have new instrumentalists with new strengths, new weaknesses, etc. And he's been sticking with this group of people for quite a long time now. So maybe that'll lead to some interesting developments. Maybe we'll get something new from Ektomorf in the pipeline. This is definitely a long wait for this album. It was a 3-year wait, and we haven't had that wait since the gap from Outcast to What Doesn't Kill Me. So, worth the wait, I guess. I mean, all of the songs are of high quality, and I wouldn't say that the content is as derivative as other Ektomorf albums have been, but that doesn't change the fact that by the time you get to the end, you're like, okay, I get it. But you're getting to the okay, I get it by like track 9, where on an album like Aggressor, you're like, oh, I get it by the time you get to like track 9 there, and you have like 5 more tracks left. So at least here, there's only 10 tracks, and by the time you're like, I'm done, it's basically done. So that's nice. So I think that's really all I gotta say. But I wanted to get my thoughts on it, and there you go. There are my thoughts on it. Cool. Bye.